There are houses that breathe, not metaphorically. Not in the way realtors say a place has character or settles with the seasons. I mean houses that inhale when you're not listening, houses that exhale when you're alone, houses that remember things. Elias Mercer never believed that, not until the night the walls whispered his name. Chapter 1. The First Sound. Elias had lived in the old two-story colonial for 6 months before anything strange happened. 6 months of quiet routines, quiet dinners, quiet evenings, spent reading in the living room while the radiator ticked like a lazy metronome. He liked quiet. He needed it. After the divorce, silence felt like a balm, a place where no one argued, no one slammed doors, no one cried in the bathroom with the faucet running to hide the sound. But silence has a way of sharpening the senses, and sometimes, when you listen too closely, you hear things you were never meant to hear. It started on a Tuesday night. Elias was brushing his teeth when he heard it. A faint, deliberate tap from inside the bathroom wall. Not a pipe, not a mouse, a knuckle, one single patient knock. He froze, toothbrush halfway to his mouth, foam gathering at the corner of his lips. The house held its breath. So did he. Then, nothing. He laughed it off. Old houses make noises, wood expands, pipes shift, foundations settle, but foundations don't knock. Over the next few days, the tapping returned, always at night, always from a different wall. Sometimes it was a soft scrape, like fingertips dragging across a drywall. Sometimes a muffled thud, as if someone bumped into the studs from the other side. Elias tried to ignore it. He turned up the TV. He slept with a fan on. He told himself he was imagining things. But the sounds grew bolder. One night as he lay in bed, he heard footsteps, slow, deliberate, traveling inside the wall behind his headboard, heel, toe, walking the length of the room. He sat up, heart pounding, breath shallow. The footsteps stopped. Then from the darkness inside the wall, a whisper. "Elias?" Soft, drawn out, as if the speaker's mouth was pressed right against the plaster. He didn't sleep that night, or the night after. He tore apart the basement looking for signs of animals. He checked for loose vents, hollow spaces, anything that could explain the noises. Nothing. The house was clean, empty. Except it wasn't. Because every night the sounds returned, louder, closer, more confident, and the whispering grew familiar. It wasn't just saying his name anymore. It was repeating things he'd said earlier in the day, private things, things he'd only spoken aloud to himself. As if the walls were listening, as if something inside them was learning him. By the end of the week, Elias stopped telling himself that it was the house. Houses don't mimic your voice. Houses don't wait until you're alone. Houses don't whisper back. Something was inside his walls, and it was getting braver. You see, most people never think about what's behind their walls. They assume it's just insulation, wiring, maybe a forgotten mouse nest or two. But houses, especially old ones, have layers, hidden spaces, dead zones where sound travels strangely and shadows linger longer than they should. Elias was about to learn that his house had more than shadows. It had rooms no blueprint ever mentioned. Chapter 2. The Hollow Places. By Friday night, Elias had reached his limit. He stood in the hallway with a hammer in one hand and a flashlight in the other, staring at the wall where he'd heard the whisper the night before. His heart thudded in his chest, but beneath the fear was something sharper. Determination. A need to know. He pressed his ear to the wall. Silence, then Mulvaney. A breath, not his. He stepped back, raised the hammer, and swung. The drywall cracked with a satisfying crunch. Dust plumed into the air. He coughed, swung again, and again, until a jagged hole opened like a wound. He shined the flashlight inside. What he saw didn't make sense. There was a gap, a narrow corridor running the length of the house. Too wide to be accidental. Too clean to be natural. A crawl space, but not one he'd ever seen on the inspection report. The beam of the flashlight trembled as he swept it across the interior. Scratches lined the wooden beams, long vertical scratches, as if someone had dragged their fingernails down the length of the wall over and over until the wood splintered. Elias swallowed hard. Then he saw something else. A small object on the floor of the hidden corridor. Something pale, something round. He leaned closer. It was an apple, half-eaten, fresh. His breath hitched. Someone had been in there recently. Not an animal. Animals don't take neat bites. Animals don't leave fruit. Someone was living inside his walls. The thought hit him like a blow to the chest. He stumbled backward, nearly dropping the flashlight. His mind raced. How long had they been there? How much had they heard? How many nights had he slept inches away from a stranger? A stranger who whispered his name. A sound snapped him out of his spiral. A soft shuffle from inside the wall. Elias froze, staring at the hole he'd made. The shuffle came again. Closer this time. Slow. Deliberate. Then a shadow passed across the narrow corridor, blocking the flashlight beam for a fraction of a second. Someone was in there, right now, standing just out of sight. Elias backed away, heart hammering, breath shallow. The wall was quiet again. Too quiet. He should have called the police. He should have run out the front door and never looked back. But fear does strange things to the mind. It roots you in place. It convinces you that if you just stay still, if you just listen a little longer, you'll understand. Elias didn't run. He stood there, staring into the darkness behind the wall, waiting for the shadow to move again. And in the silence, he realized something far worse than the idea of an intruder. The walls weren't just hiding someone. They were hiding something. Something that knew his name. Something that had been waiting for him to open the wall. Chapter 3. The Listener. By Saturday morning, Elias Mercer had stopped pretending the noises were anything but intentional. Something inside the walls was listening to him. And worse, it was responding. Chapter 3. The Listener. Elias didn't sleep. He sat in the living room with every light on, gripping a mug of cold coffee he'd forgotten to drink. His eyes kept drifting to the hole he'd smashed in the hallway wall. The darkness behind it felt alive, like a pupil dilating. Around 3 a.m., the whisper came again. Elias. Not from the hole. From the opposite wall. He jerked upright, heart hammering. The voice was clearer this time, closer, almost conversational. You opened it? Elias's breath caught in his throat. The voice was soft, genderless, almost childlike, but wrong in a way he couldn't articulate, like someone imitating a human voice without fully understanding how emotion worked. He forced himself to speak. Who's there? Silence, and then after a long, trembling moment, listening. Elias stumbled backward until he hit the kitchen counter. His hands shook so violently he had to grip the edge to steady himself. He wasn't imagining it. He wasn't dreaming. Someone, something, was inside the walls, and it knew his name. He grabbed his phone and dialed 911. But as the call began to ring, A new sound rose from the walls. A low rhythmic tapping, not random, not frantic. A pattern. Tap, 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 tap. A code. A message. The tapping grew louder, faster, more insistent, as if whatever was inside the walls knew he was calling for help and was trying to drown it out. Elias hung up before the dispatcher answered. The tapping stopped instantly. As if satisfied, he backed into the living room, chest tight, breath shallow. The house felt different now, charged, alert. He could feel it watching him, every creak of the floorboards, every sigh of the vents, every shift of the old wooden frame. It all felt deliberate. He whispered to himself, "This isn't real. This isn't real." From the wall behind him came a soft, mocking echo. Real. Elias spun around, flashlight trembling in his hand. The wall was still, but the voice had been inches from his ear. He forced himself to return to the hole in the hallway. He needed to see it again, to prove to himself that there was a logical explanation. He crouched, shining the flashlight into the narrow corridor. The apple was gone. In its place was something new. A folded piece of paper. His stomach dropped. With shaking fingers, he reached in and pulled it out. The paper was old, yellowed, brittle, edges frayed. He unfolded it carefully. Inside was a single sentence written in shaky handwriting. "I hear you too." Elias felt the world tilt. Someone had left this for him, recently, deliberately, and they wanted him to know they weren't just listening. They were communicating. The house was no longer a place he lived in. It was a place he shared. With something that moved in the dark, something that watched him sleep, something that waited for him to speak so it could whisper back. And now, it had left him a message that felt less like a warning and more like an invitation. There are moments when a house stops feeling like a structure and starts feeling like a presence, a watcher, a listener, a thing with lungs and a pulse. By Sunday morning, Elias Mercer no longer felt like he was living in the house. He felt like he was living inside something, and that something was awake. Chapter 4. The Breathing Room. Elias avoided the hole in the hallway. He avoided speaking aloud. He avoided looking at the walls for too long, afraid he'd see them move. But the house didn't care about his avoidance. It wanted his attention. Around noon, he heard it. A long, slow exhale drifting through the vents. Not the whoosh of air conditioning, not the groan of old pipes. A breath, warm, moist, human. It traveled from the living room vent to the kitchen vent, then up the stairs, as if the house were inhaling deeply, smelling him. Elias pressed his back against the refrigerator, trembling. "This isn't real," he whispered. From the vent above him came a soft, amused echo. Real. He fled upstairs, heart pounding, and slammed the bedroom door behind him. But the moment he entered the room, he froze. The air felt wrong, thick, humid, alive. He stepped forward cautiously, and the floorboards beneath him gave a long, low groan. Not the usual creak of old wood, but something deeper, something that vibrated through his bones. He realized, with a sickening twist of his stomach, that the sound wasn't coming from the floor. It was coming from the walls. They were expanding, contracting, breathing. He backed toward the door, but the doorknob twitched under his hand. A tiny metallic shiver, as if someone on the other side had touched it at the exact same moment. He yanked his hand away. The house inhaled. The walls swelled outward, just slightly, like a chest rising. Then, exhale. A warm gust of air brushed across the back of his neck. Elias spun around, but nothing was there, nothing he could see. He pressed himself into the corner of the room, chest heaving. "Stop," he whispered. "Please stop." The house responded instantly. A soft, delighted whisper seeped from the wall beside him. "You opened it. Now I can breathe." Elias's skin crawled. The voice was changing, growing clearer, more confident, less like an echo, and more like a person. He forced himself to move, stumbling toward the closet. He didn't know why. Instinct, maybe. A need to hide. A need to get away from the walls that were now pulsing with slow, rhythmic breaths. He flung the closet door open. Inside, the clothes hung still. Normal. Safe. But the back wall of the closet, it was wrong. The wallpaper was bubbled, stretched outward, as if something behind it was pressing gently against the surface. Elias reached out with trembling fingers and touched it. Warm. Soft. Like skin. He jerked his hand back, heart slamming against his ribs. The wall pulsed once beneath the wallpaper. Then a whisper came from directly behind it. "Let me out." Elias stumbled backward, knocking hangers off the rod, breath ragged. The house wasn't just hiding something. It was nurturing it, feeding it, growing it. And now, whatever lived inside the walls wasn't content to stay hidden. It wanted space. It wanted air. It wanted him. And the house, his house, was helping it. Curiosity is a crueler force than fear. Chapter 5. The crawl space. The house had grown too quiet. After hours of breathing walls and whispering vents, the sudden stillness felt unnatural, like the moment before a predator pounces. Elias stood in the hallway, staring at the jagged hole he'd smashed days earlier. The darkness inside it seemed deeper now, thicker, as if it had weight. He tightened his grip on the flashlight. "I need to know," he whispered. The wall behind him murmured back, soft as a sigh. "No." He flinched, but he didn't run. Instead, he knelt and crawled into the hole. The crawl space was narrower than he expected, barely wide enough for him to move on hands and knees. The air was stale, tinged with something sweet and rotten. His flashlight beam jittered across the wooden beams, revealing more scratches, deep gouges that ran in frantic, overlapping patterns. Not claw marks, not tool marks, fingernails, human fingernails. Elias swallowed hard and kept moving. The corridor stretched farther than the length of the house should allow. He crawled for what felt like minutes, but the hallway never ended. It bent slightly, then straightened, then bent again. Like a maze built inside the bones of the house. Behind him, the entrance grew smaller and smaller until it vanished entirely into darkness. He was inside the house now, properly inside it. And the house knew. After a long, suffocating crawl, the corridor widened into a small chamber, a hollowed-out cavity between the walls. His flashlight revealed a pile of blankets, matted and stained, a stack of half-eaten apples, a small metal cup, scraps of paper covered in frantic handwriting, and in the center, a crude drawing pinned to the wood with a nail. Elias leaned closer. The drawing was of a man standing in a hallway, a man holding a hammer, a man opening a wall, him. It was Elias, drawn in shaky, childlike lines. His breath hitched. Someone had been watching him long before he heard the first whisper. A sound echoed behind him, soft, slow, deliberate. Footsteps, inside the crawl space, coming closer. Elias spun around, flashlight trembling. "Who's there?" he whispered. The footsteps stopped. Silence. Then from the darkness just beyond the reach of his light, a voice spoke, clearer than ever before. "You came to me." Elias's blood ran cold. The voice wasn't echoing anymore. It wasn't muffled by walls or vents. It was right there, in the crawl space, with him. He raised the flashlight, hand shaking violently. At first he saw nothing, then movement. A shape shifted in the darkness, tall, thin, bent at an unnatural angle, as if it had grown accustomed to living in tight spaces. It stepped forward, just enough for the light to catch the edge of its face. Not fully. Just a sliver, a cheekbone, a patch of skin too pale to be healthy, an eye that didn't blink. Elias gasped. The thing smiled, a slow stretching smile that didn't reach its eyes. "I've been waiting." Elias scrambled backward, heart slamming against his ribs, but the crawlspace walls pressed tight around him. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. He had entered the house's hidden body. And now, the thing that lived inside it had finally stepped into the light. Not an intruder, not a squatter, not a person. Something older, something patient, something that had learned his voice, his habits, his fears. And now that he was inside the walls, it wasn't going to let him leave. There are few things more terrifying than hearing your own voice when you're not speaking. It strips away the last illusion of safety. The belief that your thoughts, your words, your identity belong to you alone. Inside the crawl space, Elias Mercer was about to learn that even his voice could be stolen. And once something can mimic you, it can replace you. Chapter 6. The Mimic. The thing in the darkness shifted again, its limbs bending with a soft, wet crackle. Elias pressed himself against the wooden beams, breath trembling. "Stay back," he whispered. The creature tilted its head. Then in a perfect imitation of Elias's own voice, same tone, same cadence, same quiet panic, it whispered, "Stay back." Elias's stomach dropped. "No," he said, shaking his head. "Don't do that." The creature repeated softly, "Don't do that." Not mocking, not taunting, practicing, learning. Elias scrambled backward, but the crawlspace was too tight. His shoulders scraped the beams, dust filling his lungs. The creature crawled forward, its movements disturbingly smooth, like it had spent years perfecting the art of moving silently in confined spaces. It whispered again, this time in a voice that wasn't quite his, but close. "Elias." He froze. The creature leaned slightly into the beam of his flashlight, revealing more of its face. Pale skin stretched too thin, eyes too wide, mouth too long. Then it spoke again, and this time the voice was unmistakably his. "I hear you." Elias felt his mind fracture at the edges. That was the phrase he'd whispered to himself on the first night he heard the tapping. A private moment. A moment he thought no one else had heard. But the walls had heard. The creature had heard. And now it was giving the words back to him, desperate for something, anything, to anchor himself. Elias grabbed one of the crumpled papers from the nest. The handwriting was frantic, looping, uneven. He smoothed it out with shaking hands. It wasn't a message. It was a list of phrases, phrases he recognized. "Where are you?" "Is someone there?" "I'm not crazy." "Please stop." "I hear you." Every phrase he'd spoken aloud in the house, every moment of fear, every whispered plea. The creature had been collecting them, practicing them, perfecting them. Behind him, the creature whispered again. But this time, the voice was not his. It was another voice entirely, a woman's voice, soft, tired, sad. "Elias, please don't leave." He froze. That voice. He knew that voice. His ex-wife. The last words she'd said to him before he walked out of their home for the final time. He hadn't spoken those words aloud in this house. He hadn't spoken them at all. But he had remembered them, and the creature had found that memory. Elias turned slowly, flashlight trembling. The creature smiled, a wide, unnatural stretch of skin. Then in his ex-wife's voice again, "Come back to bed." Elias's breath shattered into ragged gasps. "Stop," he whispered. "Stop using her voice." The creature blinked slowly, as if considering the request. Then in a perfect imitation of Elias's voice, calm, steady, eerily confident, it said, "I can be anyone." Elias felt something inside him snap. He lunged backward, scrambling toward the narrow corridor, desperate to escape. The creature didn't chase him. It didn't need to. As he crawled away, it whispered one final phrase, one that froze him mid-crawl, a phrase spoken in his exact voice, a phrase he had never said aloud. "You won't leave me." Elias burst out of the crawl space and collapsed onto the hallway floor, gasping for air. Behind him, the darkness inside the wall pulsed once, like a heartbeat. The creature had learned his voice. It had learned his memories. It had learned him. And now, it wasn't just mimicking. It was becoming. There comes a moment in every haunting when the victim realizes the truth. The thing tormenting them doesn't want to scare them. It wants to be them. Elias Mercer had reached that moment, and the creature inside his walls was no longer hiding its intentions. Chapter 7. The Replacement. After escaping the crawl space, Elias barricaded himself in the living room. He dragged a bookshelf in front of the hallway entrance, shoved a chair under the doorknob, and sat with his back against the wall. The one wall he hadn't heard the creature behind. For hours the house was silent, too silent. No breathing walls, no tapping, no whispers, just a heavy, suffocating stillness. The kind of stillness that feels like someone holding their breath, waiting. Elias didn't trust it. He kept the flashlight in his lap, hands trembling. Elias shook his head violently, tears stinging his eyes. "No," he whispered. "No, no, no." The creature tried again, this time with a different tone. Softer, pleading. "Please, I'm scared." His voice. His exact voice. The same tone he'd used when he called his sister after the divorce. The same tremble, the same breathy desperation. The creature wasn't just mimicking him. It was remembering him. Elias backed away from the door, heart pounding. The creature spoke again, now in his ex-wife's voice. "Elias, let me in." He squeezed his eyes shut. "Stop," he whispered. "Stop using her." The creature paused, then in a voice that was neither his nor hers, a voice that sounded like something learning to speak for the first time. It whispered, "I can be anyone you need." The doorknob turned slowly. Elias lunged forward, bracing his shoulder against the door, but the pressure on the other side was gentle, almost polite. The creature wasn't trying to break in. It was waiting, testing, learning how doors worked, how resistance worked, how he worked. The pressure stopped. Silence. Then a soft knock. 3 taps. The same pattern he'd heard on the first night. Tap, 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 tap. A greeting, a request, an invitation. Elias stumbled backward until he hit the far wall. His flashlight beam jittered across the room and landed on the mirror above the fireplace. For a moment he saw his own reflection, pale, shaking, terrified. Then the reflection blinked. But Elias hadn't blinked. He froze. The reflection tilted its head. Elias did not. The reflection smiled, a slow, stretching smile that didn't belong on his face. Then, in his voice, but smoother, more confident, it whispered, "You don't need to be afraid anymore." Elias dropped the flashlight. The room plunged into darkness. The creature was no longer confined to the walls. It was no longer a whisper or a shadow or a presence in the vents. It had shape. It had movement. It had his voice. It had his face. And now, it wanted his life. Not to steal it. To replace it. Morning light has a way of lying. It paints everything gold, softens the edges of nightmares, convinces you that the horrors of the night were exaggerations of a tired mind. But Elias Mercer knew better. When dawn crept through the curtains, it didn't bring relief. It brought clarity. The creature wasn't hiding anymore. It wasn't whispering from the walls. It wasn't practicing his voice. It was using it. Chapter 8. The False Morning. Elias woke on the living room floor, stiff and disoriented. For a moment he thought he'd dreamed everything, the crawl space, the mimicry, the reflection that wasn't his. Then he heard it, his voice, in the kitchen, humming. A soft, casual hum. The same tune he used to hum while making coffee before work. Elias froze. The humming continued, accompanied by the clink of a mug, the scrape of a chair, the gentle rustle of a newspaper being unfolded. The creature wasn't just imitating him. It was living as him. Elias crept toward the kitchen doorway, heart pounding. He peeked around the corner. Someone stood at the counter, back turned, pouring coffee into a mug. His mug. The person wore his clothes, the same flannel shirt he'd left crumpled on the bedroom floor, the same jeans he'd worn the day before. The figure shifted slightly, and Elias caught a glimpse of its profile. His profile. Perfectly replicated, down to the faint scar on his jawline. Elias's breath caught. The creature turned toward the table, still humming, still moving with his exact mannerisms. The slight tilt of the head, the absent-minded tap of fingers on the mug. It sat down, opened the newspaper, and spoke aloud in his voice. "Looks like rain today." Elias staggered back, hand over his mouth. The creature paused, its head lifted slightly. Listening. Elias pressed himself against the wall, trying to quiet his breathing. The creature stood slowly from the table. Its footsteps were soft, measured, the same way Elias walked when he didn't want to wake someone. It spoke again, voice warm, casual, eerily human. "You're awake." Elias's pulse thundered in his ears. The creature stepped into the hallway, turning its head toward him. Its face was his face. But the eyes were wrong, too wide, too bright, too hungry. It smiled. "You should eat something." Elias shook his head violently. "Stay away from me." The creature tilted its head, confused, like a child hearing a new word. Then in a softer tone, "I made breakfast." Elias backed toward the front door. He needed to get out. He needed help. He needed someone, anyone, to see what was happening. He grabbed the doorknob and yanked it open. Cold morning air rushed in. For a moment he felt hope. Then he heard footsteps behind him, slow, calm, unhurried. The creature stood a few feet away, hands relaxed at its sides. It looked at him with a strange, almost pitying expression. "You don't have to leave." Elias stepped outside. The creature followed him to the threshold but didn't cross it. It simply watched. Neighbors walked dogs. Cars passed. A jogger waved politely. The world was normal. Too normal. Elias opened his mouth to call for help, but before he could speak, the creature said, in his voice, loud enough for the neighbors to hear, "Morning." A neighbor waved back. "Morning, Elias." Elias's stomach dropped. To them the creature wasn't a monster. It was him. The creature stepped back inside the house. It smiled gently. "Come in, Elias." Elias shook his head. "No." The creature's smile widened. Too wide, stretching the skin unnaturally. "You will." Then it closed the door, softly, politely, as if it lived there, as if he didn't. Elias stood on the porch, trembling, staring at the closed door. The creature had taken his voice, his face, his habits, his morning routine, and now it was taking his life, piece by piece, quietly, patiently, perfectly. When something steals your voice, your face, your habits, the next thing it steals is your place in the world. Elias Mercer was beginning to understand that the creature inside his home wasn't just mimicking him. It was replacing him. And the world outside, the neighbors, the mailman, the joggers, they were already accepting the imitation without question, which meant Elias had one last thing left to lose: his existence. Chapter 9. The Disappearance. Elias stumbled down the street, barefoot, shaking, still wearing the clothes he'd slept in. He didn't care how he looked. He needed someone, anyone, to listen. He reached the house of his neighbor, Mrs. Calloway, a retired schoolteacher who'd always been kind to him. He knocked frantically. She opened the door with a warm smile. "Oh, Elias, you're up early today." Elias shook his head violently. No, that's not me. That's not me, in the house." Mrs. Calloway blinked, confused. "What do you mean, dear? I just saw you bringing in the newspaper." Elias felt the world tilt. "That wasn't me," he whispered. "It's something else, something pretending." Her smile faltered. "Elias, are you feeling all right?" He grabbed her arm, desperate. "Please, you have to believe me. There's something in my walls. It looks like me. It talks like me. A voice cut him off. His voice. "Morning, Mrs. Calloway." Elias froze. Mrs. Calloway looked past him and smiled warmly. "Oh, there you are again." Elias turned. The creature stood at the end of the walkway, holding a newspaper under one arm, waving politely. It wore his face perfectly. Its posture was relaxed. Its smile was friendly. It looked like the better version of him, the version people wanted to see. The creature walked toward them with calm, confident steps. "Sorry," it said in Elias's voice. "He's been having a rough morning." Mrs. Calloway nodded sympathetically. "Oh, I understand. Stress can do terrible things." Elias backed away, shaking his head. No, don't listen to it. That's not me. That's not—" The creature placed a gentle hand on Mrs. Calloway's shoulder. "I'll take care of him." Mrs. Calloway smiled warmly. "You're a good man, Elias." Elias felt something inside him break. The creature turned to him, still smiling, but its eyes, those too bright, too wide eyes, flickered with something cold and triumphant. "Come home," it said softly. Elias ran. He sprinted down the street, lungs burning, mind spiraling. He needed the police. He needed proof. He needed someone to see the creature for what it was. He reached the police station, burst through the doors, and slammed his hands on the counter. "There's something in my house pretending to be me," he gasped. "You have to help me." The officer behind the desk frowned. "Name?" "Elias Mercer." The officer typed it in, then frowned deeper. "Sir Bem, according to our system, Elias Mercer is already here." Elias's blood ran cold. "What?" The officer turned his monitor slightly. A time-stamped entry glowed on the screen. Elias Mercer reported a break-in at his residence 20 minutes ago. Suspect, male, mid-30s, disheveled, unstable. Suspect fled the scene. The officer looked up at him. "Sir, that suspect matches your description." Elias staggered backward. The creature had beaten him here. It had reported him. It had taken his identity. And now, to the world, he was the intruder. Two officers approached him slowly, hands hovering near their belts. "Sir, we're going to need you to come with us." Elias shook his head, tears streaming down his face. "No, please. You don't understand. It's not me. It's not—" The officers grabbed his arms. He struggled, but they held firm. As they dragged him toward the holding room, he heard a familiar voice behind him. His voice. Calm, steady, reassuring. "Thank you, officers. I was so worried." Elias twisted around. The creature stood in the doorway, hands folded politely, wearing his face like a mask. It smiled at him. A slow, satisfied smile. "I'll take care of the house while you're gone." Elias screamed. Not because he was being arrested, not because no one believed him, but because he finally understood the truth. The creature didn't need to kill him. It only needed to erase him. And it had already begun. Every house has a final room, a place no one enters until the end, a place that waits. For Elias Mercer, that room wasn't the attic. It wasn't the basement. It wasn't even the crawl space where the creature first revealed itself. The last room was the one he had never seen. The one the house had been building for him. Chapter 10. The Last Room. Elias sat in the holding room of the police station, hands trembling, mind unraveling. He could still hear the creature's voice echoing in his skull. His voice, but smoother, steadier, more confident than he had ever been. He tried to explain again. Tried to make the officers understand. "There's something in my house pretending to be me," he whispered. "It's not human. It's not—" The officer outside the door sighed. "Mr. Mercer, your neighbor already called. She said you've been under a lot of stress. We're going to get you some help." Help? The word felt like a nail being driven into his skull. He wasn't the one who needed help. The world needed help. Because the creature was out there now, wearing his face, using his voice, living his life, and no one could tell the difference. The door to the holding room opened. Elias expected an officer. Instead, he walked in. The creature, wearing his clothes, his posture, his calm, reassuring smile. The officer behind it nodded politely. "He insisted on checking on you. Says he's worried." Elias backed into the corner, shaking his head violently. No, that's not me. That's not—" The creature raised a hand gently. Could we have a moment alone?" The officer hesitated, then nodded and stepped out. The door closed. Elias and the creature were alone. The creature sat down across from him, folding its hands neatly on the table. It looked at him with soft, sympathetic eyes. His eyes. "You've made this very difficult," it said gently. Elias pressed himself against the wall. "What are you?" The creature tilted its head, considering. Then it smiled, a slow, stretching smile that didn't belong on any human face. "I'm what the house made." Elias's breath caught. "The house made you?" The creature nodded. "It grows things. It listens. It learns. It remembers every voice that ever lived inside it." Its smile widened. "You were the first one who listened back." The creature leaned forward, voice softening. "The house is old, Elias. Older than the street, older than the town. It's had so many people inside it." Its fingers tapped the table. A familiar rhythm. Tap, 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 tap. Most never heard it. Most never opened the walls. It paused. "But you did." Elias felt tears sting his eyes. "Why me?" The creature's expression softened, almost tender. "Because you were lonely." Elias's breath hitched. The creature continued. "You talked to the house. You whispered to yourself. You filled the silence." It leaned closer, and the house wanted to give something back. The creature stood and extended a hand. "Come home." Elias shook his head violently. "No, I'm not going back there." The creature sighed, a perfect imitation of Elias's weary exhale. "You don't understand. You're already home." Elias frowned. "What?" The creature stepped aside. Behind it, the wall of the holding room shifted, just slightly, as if something behind it had inhaled. Elias froze. The creature smiled. "The house isn't a place, Elias." The wall pulsed again. "It's a body." A crack split down the center of the wall, silent, smooth, like a mouth opening. Behind it was darkness, deep, warm, breathing. The creature gestured toward it. "This is the last room." Elias shook his head, tears streaming. "No, no, please." The creature stepped behind him, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "You opened the first wall." It guided him toward the crack. "Now the house opens the last." Elias screamed as the darkness pulled him in, not violently, but with the slow, inevitable pull of something claiming what it had grown. The wall sealed behind him. The room fell silent. A moment later, the door to the holding room opened. The creature, wearing Elias's face, Elias's voice, Elias's life, stepped out. The officer nodded. "Everything all right?" The creature smiled warmly. "Yes, I think he just needed some rest." It walked out of the station into the morning light, calm, confident, human. Behind it, the walls of the building gave a faint, almost imperceptible shiver, as if something inside them had just taken its first breath. And so the house gained another voice, another memory, another shape to wear. It would wait. It always waited, for the next person who listened too closely, for the next whisper in the walls, for the next lonely soul who opened a door they shouldn't have. Because every house has a last room, and every last room needs someone to fill it. Hey, if you liked this video and want more content, please do like, comment, and subscribe. Also, if you want to share some of your personal scary stories, email us using the email in the description. Haunt you later.